everyone. Good evening. I'm Melisa Idris, and you're watching The Future is Female. This is the show where we find the extraordinary in every woman. Joining us on the show tonight, I'm delighted to welcome Heidy Quah. She's the director of Refuge for the Refugees, which is an NGO that serves to provide education and opportunities for refugee children, which she founded when she was only 18. She's the first and only Malaysian to receive a Queen's Young Leaders Award, which was presented to her in 2017 for her work. Heidi, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you on. How are you
Thanks so
doing?
much for having me, Melissa.
Yeah, it's great. No, I'm so glad that we're able to do this today. I've been really wanting to speak to you for, I think it's been about a year now, Heidi. But you know what? I completely understand because this year has been an intense year, and I can imagine that you've been incredibly busy, understandably so, trying to help and do what you can for the many displaced people struggling under the weight of this pandemic. Maybe you can begin there, Heidi. Tell us a little bit about what this year has been for you, because I know you've been working with refugees since you were a teenager,
Yes.
but what have you seen and experienced this past year?
Yeah, so the past year's been pretty crazy. So Refuge to Refugees is a non-profit organization that seeks to raise awareness regarding the plight of refugees in Malaysia, as well as provide education for refugee children. Now 9 years into the work, we have about 35 schools, 2 halfway homes, and a social business school. When the pandemic first hit, we had to not just shift all our schools online, and it's really just facing the harsh reality that a lot of these kids don't have access to devices, right? While all of us were staying home, and staying safe, these kids were forced to stay in homes, with over 30 people at a go sometimes, just because it's how their living environments are like. So
Mm.
how exactly do we kind of like run schools from there? After spending quite a bit of time on the ground, we realized that the even bigger need next to education was food security. A lot of the families, had lost their jobs, and they were dependent on daily wage. We started receiving calls at 3, 4, 5 a.m. in the morning from fathers and mothers, telling us that they have gone 3, 4 days without eating, and they have young kids, and that's when we realized that we had to meet that need through food
So,
security.
so it's more than just schools, because I know that you have
Yeah.
schools here in Malaysia and in
Yeah.
Myanmar as well. So you're
Yeah.
saying that you're not just working with the children for the education. Goes beyond that. This goes to family life and home as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we do quite a fair bit of advocacy work, and now we look into, taking care of their health, looking into food security for them. Since the pandemic started, we've been feeding about 1,000 families on a weekly basis, and we're still at it until today.
So, okay, let's come back. Let's rewind a little bit because you said it's been about 9 years that you've been doing this. So how did you begin? Because you started as a teenager and you founded a school as a teenager. How did you come to work with refugees, Heidi?
Yeah, so I think it all started in secondary school for me. I went to Sekolah Kebangsaan, SMK Damansara Jaya, and
Okay,
my
so
close
kind of
circle
a
of friends.
privileged background, a
Yeah,
middle class background. Okay.
yeah, a really middle class background, and all started, from having friends that were debaters and public speakers and people who represented the school in one way or another. And every day, we'll gather around the canteen and talk about, what the government is not doing enough and what NGOs are not doing enough, right? And that's when we realized that, like, hey, we're a bunch of kids sitting there, eating our nasi lemak. And that those days it was a privilege, right? That one ringgit nasi lemak was a big deal. Drinking a Bandung ice, but here we are pointing fingers about what people were not doing enough. And then it made me think, what am I doing? Um, Besides pointing fingers. And that's really how we started, asking around about the needs, and then being pointed to the refugee school in the heart of KL that needed help. So we
Okay.
started teaching there. And long story short, 4 months in, we were told that the school will be closed down due to lack of funds. And that's when I started, finding ways to run Refuge to Refugees as a project, first to raise awareness regarding the plight of refugees in Malaysia, then to ensure that these kids will have access to formal education.
So okay, so the school that you were helping out at was closing
Yeah.
down. You said, okay, I'm going to start a new school. I'm going to start, another school to help
Yeah.
refugee children get some education. And you did that as a teenager. I'm wondering how did you do that? I mean, we often think, oh, I can't do anything to change the situation. I'm one person. I'm not going to be able to make a difference. How did you come to put this school together to make sure that it was up and running and make it a reality?
Yeah, so for us, I think it started a lot by first telling the stories of the community on the ground. We took it to social media. I guess educating people on the needs. And I guess
Mm.
when we started sharing the needs on the ground, different ones came and go like, hey, you know what? We can look into renting a space together. Hey, you know what? We can look into getting chairs and furnitures. So I think it was just input from different really kind Malaysians along the way that helped us
Oh,
set up
that's
the
nice.
school. And then, of course, through amazing mentors. I remember back then at 18, I didn't know what to do. And I Googled names of mentors that were running NGOs and found out about Dr. Hartini Zainuddin, right? And I remember writing
Oh,
her a
right, yes.
super long email going like, hey, I really want to do this, but I need guidance.
Mm.
Would you meet up with me for a conversation? And she did. I was 18. We met up in Bangsa. We had a conversation, and
What
that's
what
really
did
how
you
I
ask
became.
her? What did you ask her, Heidi? I mean, what were the things that you needed to know to get that going? Because I'm wondering if someone's watching today and they're saying, well, I want to make a difference. I want to help as well. And I have all these questions. What did you ask Tini, Dr. Tini, that you can perhaps share with us tonight?
Yeah, so I think I asked a lot of questions around sustainability of the work. How do we sustain and not just rely on fundraising? Another question I asked her as well is how do we effectively support the communities, right? Because I
Right.
didn't want to go in as a so-called like privileged Malaysian in that sense, going like, hey, this is what you need, but I want to truly understand the needs on the ground and how do I get the communities
Like a
involved?
savior complex thing where you
Yes,
come in and
exactly.
or like performative activism. You really
Yeah,
the opposite of that. You want to make a difference on the ground.
yeah.
So what did she say?
And I I think at the point of time, she just really sat there and listened to me and just
Okay.
encouraged me. And she gave me some pointers, as to how do we engage the communities, how do we engage the communities in a way where they feel comfortable with us and we don't feel like a threat, right?
Mm-mm.
And I think that was key. How do we use storytelling as a platform to bring people in, not in a way where it's almost flashed up um, as as emotional blackmail, just sharing the needs on the ground in that sense, but in a way that allows people insight as to what happens on the ground so that they can play a part in helping communities too.
Yeah, I think that's important that it's not just about helping, but it's about taking those experiences and those stories and telling them to other people and representing it in a way that, this is the lived realities of some refugees. Maybe, maybe you didn't know about this, but this is what it is. I really like that. I'm just very curious. I mean, this might seem to be a somewhat basic question, but I'm wondering who are the refugees that you're helping? Of course, they're not homogenous, but you know, uh, where are they from? How did they come to be displaced? How did they come to be in Malaysia? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah. So a lot of so Malaysia is often a temporary stopover for refugees when they need to seek immediate shelter before they get resettled or before they apply for resettlement to countries like the US, Australia, New Zealand, where they will be properly identified as a refugee. Malaysia is not a signatory of the Refugee Convention Protocol, so when refugees come to Malaysia, they don't have access to education, to healthcare, to job opportunities. A lot of times it's just a waiting game until they finally get resettled. And then again, not everyone gets resettled, right? So I think in
Yeah.
Malaysia, 90% of the refugees come from Myanmar, and this would consist of the Rohingya refugees as well as the Burmese refugees. And then there's, you know, in the mix, there would be Somali refugees and Pakistani refugees and refugees from Yemeni refugees as well. So these are the mix that predominantly are in Malaysia. One of the reasons why these people would have to flee their countries is due to persecution and war. A lot of times, whether is it political persecution or religious persecution, sometimes it's really dependent on the tribe they come from as well. And because it's either life or death for them, right? That's when they have to flee the country and seek shelter in Malaysia.
Right. Okay. So, and your school teaches children, so they provide education for young refugee children. I'm wondering, what are you teaching them in the school? I mean, again, like you said, they've got no access to not just education, but also healthcare and work. So, for young refugee children, what would that be like in the schools, teaching them? And I'm wondering, I mean, are you teaching them language? Is there a communication barrier? Do you have language barriers that you have to deal with?
Yeah, so when we first started, language barrier was so real. I mean, these kids, I had to learn the Burmese language. I had to learn the Chin
Oh,
language.
wow.
I have dictionaries with me. A lot of times, I would have to draw charts with English translations and Burmese translations, and the kids would tell me that my drawing was terrible, but they sort of understand what I'm trying to get at. So I think when we first started about 9 years ago, we had to learn the language. Now the kids communicate a lot better. In school, we teach them the basics, English, Malay, languages that they need to get around here in Malaysia. We teach them math, science. So we cover a lot of the core subjects. We run formal education in school. So um, a lot of our kids are doing certified education one way or another.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, so that has been really exciting.
Well, so it's been 9 years, and the kids that you probably taught in the early days of the refugee school probably have now grown up, become adults.
Yeah.
Well, do you know, have you kept track of them? Do you know
Yeah.
what's happened to them?
Yeah, so we keep in touch. We do keep in touch quite a fair bit,
Oh, that's
and it's
good.
amazing. Our kids, who we've got this girl, her name is Boy Chin, and she's resettled to the U.S. And she graduated top valedictorian of her high school, and then went on by receiving a full scholarship to Georgia Tech University, being the
Wow.
first in her family, to actually go to university. So that was a really big deal. We've got a few kids who are still here in Malaysia. One of them, her name is Angela. She's now actually working in a shelter caring for victims of violence, and to see
Wow.
our kids come a full cycle, not just in graduating university, but coming back in the role of activism
Yeah,
and speaking up for the communities.
contributing to the
Yeah,
society. That's amazing.
has
Heidi, you
been
said that
amazing.
some of them get resettled in other countries, and not all of them do. So is this like a lucky draw situation? I mean, can do will they know if they get to be resettled? It feels like it's such a precarious future, not knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's hard because across the world, globally, if I'm not mistaken, only 0.01% of the entire refugee population actually gets resettled, right? So everyone has hope to be resettled, but not everyone gets resettled. And so with these kids, it's often a waiting process. Um, and sometimes they get called in. A lot of times they get resettled based on how dire their situation is. Obviously, the rules and the allocation for resettlement keeps changing, right? That's
Right.
why less and less of them gets resettled these days.
Okay. All right, Heidi, we're going to take a quick break here on the Features Female, but let's come back and continue our conversation. There's still so much to cover, and I want to talk a little bit about this, backlash that we've seen towards undocumented migrants and refugees. So let's come back and talk about that. Make sure you stay tuned to the Features Female. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Futures Female. I'm speaking tonight to Heidy Quah. She is the director and co-founder of a Refuge for the Refugees, which is an NGO that serves to provide education and opportunities for refugee children. Heidi, let's talk a little bit about something you said a bit earlier about food security. I understand Refuge for the Refugees also looks to fundraise and to buy provisions and disseminate that to the refugee community. 60 ringgit can feed a
Yeah,
family for how long, Heidi?
for 2 weeks. Yeah.
That's incredible. How has that been? I mean, I can imagine that much of your time is spent fundraising, and it
Yeah.
feels like it's a thankless and tireless job to do that, particularly during a pandemic when everyone is economically stretched. So,
Yeah.
how has fundraising taken a toll on you?
It's been so hard. I mean, just given the volume of families that we feed on a weekly basis, about 1,000 families, this means having to fundraise about
Wow.
60,000 ringgit a week. So it's been really hard. I mean, we're just so thankful for the generosity of people in Malaysia. But again, with that also comes backlash, when we're fundraising, right? Because people are looking at our posters, despite us saying that we're helping refugees, migrants, and local B40 communities, people are asking us, why are we helping the refugees and migrants when the locals in Malaysia are really struggling as well? So it's just having to juggle that, having to just tell them and educate them on the plight of refugees in Malaysia and why
Do
do
they
we
say that to you?
collectively.
Like, do they
Yes,
actually
they
say to
do.
you, why are you helping foreigners effectively when locals are also struggling?
Yeah, so we get like they say to us, even our volunteers that are not fundraising also get comments as such, and it's not just sassy comments on Facebook. Sometimes it comes all the way into your DMs, on Facebook and on Instagram. People telling you that, hey, you shouldn't be helping refugees. You should focus on helping Malaysians. And if you help refugees, you're considered a pengkhianat negara in that sense, right? You're considered
Wow,
not loyal to your country.
that is that is incredible. Now, I I've been concerned about the rise of xenophobic comments, particularly making undocumented migrants and refugees scapegoats in this. Getting caught in the crossfire of the public health response, also the xenophobic backlash. But what I've noticed more and more is it's not so clear cut. It is not this rise in clear hate speech or xenophobic rhetoric. It's often more nuanced than that. It's more of hey, I'm in trouble too. Locals are in trouble too. Why are you helping them instead of
Yeah.
us? And it's like this mindset. And I struggle to have conversations to explain about why we it's not a trade-off, about why we can help both.
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk a little bit to me about that. When you have conversations with the people who say, "Well, Malaysians are suffering too," how do we convince them that it's not a
Yeah.
trade-off? It's not us against them. We help
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's what, I say all the time. It's not us against them. A lot of times, I think we run on that scarce mentality, thinking that there's not enough to go around.
Right.
But I sincerely do 100% believe that there is sufficient to go around, right? And when we help when we help everybody, we collectively get better together.
Right.
Um, and so, we don't need to pick sides and choose who deserves help more. There's enough help to go around. And when we look into, I mean, for example, additional comments would be refugees carry the virus, migrants carry the virus. Look at their living conditions, they're so unsanitary. People say stuff like that. But then, if I mean, first of all, I don't think it's fair to say that. But if that's really your thinking, shouldn't we then help them so that we all can survive the pandemic together? And it's also looking at them and saying that, like, hey, they're people as well, right? They have kids and they have families, and if I'm in their shoes, I mean, honestly, overnight I can become a refugee in another country, right? How would I
Good
want
point.
to be treated then? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And based on your work with refugees, what is it that they need at the moment? I want to dispel the myth that refugees are just looking for a handout. What actually they're looking for is what you just said, right? Just a way to raise their family in peace and security, perhaps opportunities that we
Yeah.
take for granted
Yeah.
so easily. So when you
Yeah.
speak to displaced people, the refugee community, what are they telling you that they need, that they want?
Yeah, I think number one would be a safe space to be heard and to be seen as a regular human being. Um, they keep telling us, they don't want handouts, and actually, it's so difficult for them to actually even come to a place of having to ask for handouts. What they want is equal opportunities. I'm not saying high flying jobs in corporates, but opportunities to earn um earn an honest living so that they can find ways to support their families, and they don't need to keep going around begging for help because they want to play a part. Melissa, during the pandemic, when we were fundraising, what was incredible was that we kept getting calls from the refugee community, not asking for help, but telling us that they want to donate as well. But
Oh,
because they don't have
wow.
bank accounts, they will be going to ATMs and donating money. Many of them also wrote in telling us that they might not be able to donate money, but they can lend their hands to pack. They can help unload lorries of rice and pack potatoes and eggs and garlic. And I think that was really heartwarming, right? Because sometimes when they fill up our aid forms requesting for help, and when we finally get to them about 2 weeks later, when we reach the doors of their house, they tell us that, what, someone has just given us food. We now have enough to survive for the next 2 weeks. Why don't you pass this on to another family in need? And this
Oh,
is what they're really
wow.
saying, right? That they want to play a role in helping build Malaysia as well. They don't want to be dependent on handouts. They want to be treated just like you and I.
Right. That is amazing to know that they're not again, just looking for an equal opportunity, just
Yeah,
looking for a go in life, right? So
yeah,
I'm wondering, Heidi, your work with NGOs like Refuge for the refugees, similar other NGOs also working with the refugee community in Malaysia. Do the refugees in these communities trust authorities to help them, or are they more trusting towards NGOs that they see on a daily
yeah,
basis, even perhaps see
yeah,
working on the ground? Is there
yeah,
a sense of distrust to authorities
yeah.
and law enforcement?
Yeah, definitely, right? Because of the mixed messaging that has been in place, because of the mass arrest that took place, because of the mistreatment towards, refugees and asylum seekers
Yeah,
and migrants, there tend to be a mistrust towards authorities. And as compared to NGOs that have been on the ground, they see us and they know our heart and they know what we do. And often, when designing solutions, we include them as part of the discussion. And I think that makes a
right.
difference, right? Because they want to feel that they're part of this solution and not just receiving the end of whatever we think is best for them.
Right, yeah, for sure. I mean, and there's some danger in, distrust or this trust deficit, especially in coming out
Yeah,
to get registered for the vaccine, to seek healthcare, and a lot more needs to be done trying to reduce this trust deficit.
yeah,
Maybe working with NGOs like yourself, Heidi,
yeah,
would be really good in trying to get the message on the ground. You brought up the raid that happened, I think about
yeah,
a year ago. Is it? But in June, if I'm not mistaken. I can't
yeah.
remember the
In
exact
about
date.
March, April.
Was it March,
um
April? Okay, so
yeah,
that was when
no, sorry,
that was.
May. It was during Labor's Day time ish. Yeah,
Yes, so
yeah,
the detention of the refugees and migrants, the
yeah,
immigration raids, that did a lot to
yeah,
sour the relationship or to create this trust deficit. I'm wondering, Heidi, you personally also suffered quite a bit of backlash
yeah,
from that. I mean, there was a lot of hate speech coming. You actually got discriminated against
yeah,
for advocating for refugees.
yeah,
How did you kind of get through that? I'm sure that must have been really a
yeah,
dark episode in your life, and
yeah,
keep going and make that decision to continue helping. How,
yeah.
in hindsight now, what was that period like for you?
I think first of all, having colleagues on the ground like Dr. Trini, who really helped kind of kept me grounded in that sense and being reminded of my why and my focus kept me going, and also understanding the needs on the ground because the backlash was insane. I mean, until
Yes.
today, sometimes I still get comments in my inboxes, and it gets really disheartening. But I think being reminded of why we're doing this, why I'm doing this, really helped me overcome, and look at the bigger picture, that instead of taking a few steps back, I need to keep focused on the work because the needs on the ground is real, and instead of being bitter and angry at everyone, that wouldn't serve me, right? So how do I rechannel all these emotions into supporting the communities?
Yeah, no, I can't imagine what you went through at that time to be, a target when you were just trying to help. So my heart goes out to you, and I'm so glad that you got through that and continued helping and as they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm quite curious to know, were they hoping that you would stop and stop helping or stop your work? Is that what they were trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's exactly just that, right? They're hoping they will
Okay.
scare me into being quiet. They'll scare me into, stop extending help and support to the refugee community. They will kind of
Mhm.
scare me into submission in that sense.
Well,
But
okay.
I
In that
think
case,
in
you won,
hindsight,
Heidi. In
yeah,
continuing your work, you won.
yeah.
All right. I'm glad for that. In the couple of minutes that we have left, I wanted to ask you, just from your work, what is it that you're hoping would change the most? What kind of policy change needs to happen so that refugees that you work with get an even go at life, that you would really like to see change in the near future?
Yeah, definitely. I think the key would be, first of all, including the refugee community at tables whenever we have discussions around laws and
Mhm.
policies. A lot of times we just tap into activists and advocates and NGOs, which are great. I mean, I don't deny that, but of course, the lived reality is so different, right?
Right. You
And
want to hear
often,
from them, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
we want to hear from them. I think second of all, it's also just improve relationships with the authorities, right? We cannot look into policy change when the communities do not trust authorities because they constantly feel at threat. So how do we look into improving the communities, improving the relationships with the communities? But more than that, it's just equal opportunities, right? At education, at job opportunities, at healthcare. I believe that no one loses out when everyone is taken care of in that sense. There are enough resources to go around, and Malaysia is a country that is extremely, kind of generous. I don't think, yeah. So if we do, I think in summary, what I'm just really trying to say, right, is that if we do care for the communities, they would want to play their role in helping build
Right.
Malaysia as well. And so much of
Yeah.
our economy is dependent on them, actually. Yeah,
Yes. And we take it for granted. We don't see it. It's almost
yeah.
invisible to us, right? Heidi, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I have been waiting a long time to speak to you, and I'm glad that I get to do it with International Women's Day just around the corner.
Yeah.
And I want to wish you a happy International Women's Day. You are my hero. So thank you for coming on
Thank
the
you so
show.
much, Melisa. Thank you so much for having me.
That's all we have for you on this episode of The Future is Female. I'm Melisa Idris, and I will catch you same time next week. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.